Well, hey everyone, I am your host, Gentry, and welcome to the Vibrant Life Show. This show is all about exploring the purposes God has placed in our lives and the passions He's placed in our hearts to reach the communities He's placed us in for such a time as this. So, whether we're hearing stories of those living out their passions, helping you discover your purpose, asking hard questions, or leaning into cultural moments, the hope of this show is to remind us that the life that we are created to live is an adventurous one, a meaningful one, a purposeful one. We are invited to live the vibrant life. These last few years especially have made it pretty difficult for most of us to feel as if we are living a vibrant life, this abundant life that Jesus promises us in John 10:10, where we just feel like, yes, we're invigorated to go do the thing we're so passionate about, because so often we made plans. We made decisions. We made all of these things, this hope for our future. And almost 2 years ago today, of the day of this recording, our lives changed around the world when it shut down. And 15 days turned into 2 years, and here we are and unsure how to make decisions. And there oftentimes creates this gap of what happens between our expectations of what we even thought of. Do you remember when we rang in 2020 on January 1st, 2020? I mean, December 31st, 2019, like we were so excited. We're like, the roaring 20s, and this is going to be so amazing. And we were just so excited. We had all these expectations. But what happened is that reality hit us pretty quickly right after that. And when our expectations don't always match our reality, sometimes that causes us to not trust and to not hope for something good for our future. I went to school in London for a little while there in college. I decided after I stopped playing volleyball, I'm like, I want to travel the world. So that's one of my things. I know if you've been with me long enough, you've probably heard a lot of relatively horror stories of me traveling, because I just tend to get myself in very, interesting situations. But what was awesome is that I spent some time in London and went to school over there. I think it was my junior year of college. And one of the things in London, I don't know if you've ever been there, but when you're getting onto the tube, which is like the underground train, however you want to, the metro, however you want to describe it, but it's called the tube over there. And one of the things that happens is like right on the platform before you get onto the tube, onto the train, it says, mind the gap. And so there's this gap that happens in between the platform and the train. And sometimes there's no gap, and sometimes there's a huge gap, and sometimes there's actually a step up to get onto the the train. And this woman comes over, and I know that if you've been over there, you know this voice. And she goes, please mind the gap between the train and the platform. And she says that because, and I was actually told this not too long ago when I was talking about this story to someone. They said that it used to be a man's voice and would yell it, mind the gap. And sometimes I just wish in life we had a voice that came over that just said, please mind the gap between your expectations and your reality. Because wouldn't that just be so helpful if we knew that there was going to be this gap between what we expected, what we've planned for, what we've hoped for, and what actually happens? Because I think what happens in between this gap a lot of times, especially when we put these expectations and our hopes and what's happening for our future, we believe that these are things God's promised us or God's given to us. But when they don't come to pass, we start to get this frustration, disappointment, hopelessness that comes over us. And sometimes I would even go as far to say it makes us hard to trust that God is for us, that God is with us, and that God is good. I'm not sure if you've been there, because I definitely have over these last couple of years. And truthfully, over this last year, I had to really go through a season of my life wondering, God, this is what I thought my life was going to look like at this point. And if you would have just protected me from all these other things, then this would have been this is what the outcome would have looked like, because my reality didn't match the expectations I had for my life. But what I want to challenge us in when we start to have those feelings is, what are we putting our expectations in? Because in Romans 15:13 it says, "Now may the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace as you trust in him, so that you may overflow with hope by the power of the Holy Spirit." So hope is a confident expectation of good things to come based on God's unchanging character. And the way we use hope a lot of times is just kind of frivolous in a sense. It doesn't actually, in our English, hold the weight of hope of what it really means. Because hope means that it's an eternal thing. It's God's unchanging character. And I believe I got that definition from my friend Sherry Wagner, who's actually been on the show before, who's just an incredible Bible teacher. But when we talk about hope, this is eternal. This is something that is unchanging and something good based on God's unchanging character, not based off of our world's circumstances. If anyone has been skydiving, okay, when you get into that plane and you're going up, your hope is that parachute's going to open up when you jump out of that plane. Anyone just like, why? First of all, you're probably asking why anyone would do that. I'm sure there's a group of you out there. And there's another group of you that's like, I would do that over and over again. And you're taking this risk, this trust, this hope that this parachute, when you take this risk, is going to open, or the backup one is, or, God's just going to like send an angel and catch you in the air. And I've been 3 times, so I think I'm really pushing my luck around in here. Maybe I shouldn't try it anymore. 3 times was the charm and I should stop. But even in that reality, a hope is not a wish or a desire. So my hope is a wish or desire that this parachute would open, but actually that's something that I would wish, and my desire is that it opens. But my hope cannot be in something that changes. My hope cannot be in something that could one day and not the other. See, true hope, and a lot of times we even say, hope you have a good day, which, I still say all the time. But the fact is that it means so much more. Hope means so much more than that, and it's based in God's unchanging character. So what happens when God, the God of hope that we talked about, allows our lives to look different than we've expected? And in that expectation versus reality, a lot of times we find ourselves in a Proverbs 13:12, hope deferred makes the heart sick. But a longing fulfilled is a tree of life, is what it says in 13:12. And a lot of times we find ourselves where this hope is deferred and it feels like it's pushed off. And referring to what I was opening when we were talking about what's happened in the last 2 years, our hope has been deferred of anything that looks normal again. When are we going to get to hang out? When are we going to get to go? When is everybody going to be healed? We don't have to worry about sickness. We don't have to worry about the pain of all of this or isolation. When? And a lot of times our hope gets deferred. Or maybe you have gotten a diagnosis that's really painful, and it's hard to have hope in the midst of this swirling around you. Or your family has lost the place that they were going to live or that you were living. There's so many things that it feels like there's hopeless situations. But God says that He is the God of hope, and that no matter what we're going through, He will fill us with joy and peace as we trust in Him. And we have to mind the gap between our expectations and our reality, because a lot of times, if we're not careful, it will cause us to not trust in Him. And maybe that happened to you in relationships before, where you expected something of someone, whether it be a friend or a romantic relationship or even a work relationship. You expected something, and then they didn't come through on what they said they were going to do or what you thought they said they were going to do. So it creates this distrust in someone, because you feel like they didn't live up to what they promised you. And when we project that onto God, it's not true. It's not true, because He is hope. And so sometimes we have to trust in Him even when we don't even feel like it and we don't even know how to hope. But the God of hope will fill us with joy and peace as we still say, you know what, I'm going to trust you. I'm going to have faith that you're going to somehow work this out like you said you would, that you will make good things out of all things, whether at this moment or in the future. And then by trusting in Him, we will actually get filled back up with hope and then be empowered by the Holy Spirit. And so my hope for us is that faith in hope is action. Faith is hope in action. So in Hebrews 11:1, it says, now faith is confidence of what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. So faith is hope in action. So faith is like, okay, I have this hope and I'm going to keep moving forward. I have faith that no matter what I can actually physically see, I can trust in the unseen. I can trust in God's changing character, and I can still walk forward in hope and trusting that he can come through for me. But what happens is that faith and fear cannot occupy this same amount of space, because I believe that it holds the same space within us. Most of us, it's like when it says do not fear, a lot of times like we think we have to get to a point where we're just never going to fear anything in our lives. And the reality is that we probably are going to have to do a lot of things afraid, but with courage and more faith in our fear. So back to the skydiving example. I had to have more faith that parachute was going to open than the fear that it wouldn't, for me to actually risk jumping out of that airplane. So it's like I had to diminish the fear, because I'm telling you, it was there. And when you're flying up and the world is getting smaller and smaller and you think, oh, I could jump from here, this is fine, and they keep going like a few thousand more feet, you're like, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? But I still had to have more faith that if I jump, the parachute's going to work the way that it's supposed to, than fear that it won't, for me to actually take that step of faith, to leap out of an airplane, to jump out and trust that this thing is going to be fun. It's going to be scary, but it's going to be okay. And if we translate that to our lives, a lot of times it's hard for us to take steps of faith, because the fear of the unknown hinders us from the adventure, from the purpose, from the meaning, from the vibrant life that God actually has for us, because what we've hoped for or what we expected and the reality that we see doesn't match up. So it's actually really difficult for us to keep moving forward. And that's what I want to talk about today as we continue on in this conversation about when our expectations and reality don't match up, and how hard it is to trust God. Let's just be honest. Like sometimes it can be hard to trust God when things don't look the way that we want them to look or what we hope for them to look. And so I think that sometimes two of the things that we do as we're continuing on in this conversation is two things that we do. We either fill the gap or we feel the gap. So the first one is fill the gap. So this is more external. This is doubt, and out of fear, you want to control things. We want to control the world around us. We become our own source of help. And sometimes we move too soon because we're just tired of waiting. So there's this gap, remember, like mind the gap. There's this gap between the train and the platform, and we want to fill it because we're like, I don't know if I can step here. I just want God to fill all these things. I want to, whether it's relationships or maybe it's the job that you don't want to wait on God to bring the perfect one. So you say yes to something over there, or it's whether it's the decision you have to make or the relationship in your life, or maybe you're feeling alone. And so you're dating people that really are not God's best for you, but you're tired of waiting. And in that gap, you start to fill it with people so that you don't feel lonely. And this is very external. This is a place of doubt. The Israelites did this, okay? So the Israelites were freed from Egypt, and they were supposed to go on an 11-day journey, and it ended up being 40 years. 40 years. Why? I believe it's because they expected the promised land to come immediately. But God had to work some things out in the wilderness and in the waiting. Because Moses had to go up to the mountaintop, and they're like, where did Moses go? And he's up there getting the 10 Commandments, and Aaron and the people start complaining in the meantime. And that's what happens a lot of times. We start complaining. We start complaining because we're waiting, and we're tired of waiting, and we're confused. Like, where did God go? Did he just abandon us? And so they create an idol for themselves, and they create this calf that was probably like not very big. If you're on YouTube, I mean, you can see me, but it's about this big. And out of all of the gold they had, because they wanted a God that they could see, that was with them right then, because they were in this waiting period. The expectation for God to be there every step of the way and for them to be in the promised land started, and then it didn't happen on their time schedule. they started to fill that gap, fill the void with other idols in their lives, whether it be the calf that was the representation of God, but for us, it could be so many other things. It could be alcohol. It could be pornography. It could be binge watching TV. Guilty? Anybody? That's something that I do because I'm trying to fill the void where I don't want to feel this emotion. So I binge something and I fill that gap. But God has more for us in the waiting. He actually wants to reveal stuff to us in the waiting. And we can actually shorten the length of time. Remember, it was supposed to be an 11-day journey for those Israelites, and it turned into 40 years. And that generation didn't even get to enter the promised land because they were not putting their hope in the God that's unchanging and the God that delivered them from slavery after 400 years. They put their hope in a little gold calf that they created themselves. And in that, they found more despair and really hopelessness because it couldn't fulfill the longing that they had within them, because God is the only one who can do that. And we can't do that with politics, Christians. That is not the thing that we need to fill this gap where we're like, God, we need help. Yes, Christians, be in government. Why not? We need to make changes in our culture. Yes. And live vibrantly with the gifts and the graces that the community God's placed you in, 100%. But we cannot put our hope in whoever is running our government, because God is actually sovereign over all of that. And he will make all things new is actually what he promises us. And so we can make idols out of these things to hold so tightly to, because what we're experiencing is not what we expected. The other one is feeling, F-E-E-L, the gap. And that's more internal. This a lot of times can result in anxiety and depression, and it's where you kind of pull back. So remember, fill in the gap, you go forward and you just kind of move outside of what God's doing. Again, examples, like when I was in college, I experienced a lot of things in my life. So I turned to alcohol, I turned to guys, I turned to those types of things outside of my life to fill the gap. It was outward, but feeling it is internal. It's anxiety. It can lead us to anxiety and depression, and it makes us pull back away from people and away from God. And we're like, no, I don't even want to deal with this. And a lot of times this can cause this shortness of breath. When I became a Packer fan, and I think I've shared this story on the show before, so I'm not going to totally go into it, but I watched that Super Bowl during a huge storm, and I was afraid of tornadoes, and I had such bad anxiety every time a storm came in because I couldn't even handle it, right? And so I'm sitting there watching the first Super Bowl, like the Super Bowl that I really paid attention to was when the Packers beat the Patriots. Go Pack Go. And I sat there and my hands were in my ears and I just started to breathe deeply, because when I had anxiety, I had shortness of breath. And then when I found football, it gave me an escape essentially in that moment, but it helped me breathe deeper. And a lot of times what happens is in our anxiety, we get the shortness of breath. And in Philippians 4:4-7, it says, "Rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." To point out, do not be anxious. The original understanding of the word anxious is do not be short of breath. God is near. And present this in every situation. And so when we feel like our expectations aren't meeting our reality, that God's just so far away, the promise right here says to rejoice because he's near with us, and to breathe deeply. Don't be short of breath about anything, but in every situation, in prayer and petition with thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is such a way for us to get out of those pits where we're just anxious and we are depressed and we are fighting because the hope has been deferred and our heart feels sick. But God is a God of life and he will fulfill those needs, but sometimes it takes just complete trust that even when it doesn't feel like he's with us, that he is near to us and we do not need to be anxious. And the word peace really is that deep breath and that shalom. And I love it because Jesus' first words to his disciples after he was risen from the dead, they were in the upper room and he comes in there after they had been freaked out. They ran from everyone. They hid away because Jesus was being crucified and they're taking him to the cross, and Peter denies Jesus 3 times. And then all the disciples, except for John, is hiding away in this upper room, this anxiety. Are we going to be killed? What's going to happen to Jesus? What's going to happen to our lives? We've just invested all of this time. And Jesus steps into a moment where they're hiding away and he speaks shalom, peace. The first word that he says to them is peace. And I speak that over you and over myself today, peace over our internal thoughts when things aren't looking how we hoped, or that relationship that we've already invested 4 years into, or whatever it might be that is ending, where it feels hopeless. But God's saying, I have peace for you even in the midst of this moment. That's what happened to me whenever I gave my life back over to Jesus. When I was talking about, I looked for external ways to fill the gap. And then when you do that for long enough, you're like, this is not working. And you really do begin to feel the gap in between that expectation and reality. And I was on the verge of taking my own life. And Jesus, I really believe that's the first time that I really met Jesus, the Prince of Peace. I was anxious. I was just crying out to him, and he met me in that moment in a closet, and I knew shalom in a moment, and it took away all anxiety. And now I had to work after that. I still had to, put things in place to help my mental health and to get rid of friends in my life, and the things that I used to fill the gap, I had to acknowledge them and to put things in place not to go back to them, because that's really hard. So then I ended up in a situation where my life really didn't look anything like I had been experiencing for a couple of years, yet I actually found hope even when I didn't have friends and I didn't have all the things I had for that moment. God began to restore and in time bring the things that really showed me that I had expectation in people, expectation in my major, expectation in my job, expectation in my family, or things like that they weren't met. And God's like, you can't put expectation in anything but me, because I am the only unchanging one. And I want to speak that, and I want you to know that today, that our heart and our hope can be firm because God is who he says he is. Even if your life doesn't look the way that you expected it to. Maybe you were married and now you're divorced, or you're still single. I understand that. Or maybe you wanted children and it wasn't given to you, or you do have them and they're not really close with you right now. God is so good, and he is sovereign over all. And even when it feels like he didn't protect us or he didn't show up for us, I guarantee you that we're putting our expectation in something else than who we know him to be. And Priscilla Shire, I love her so much. She's an amazing Bible teacher. She said, your level of faith will always be tied to your perception of God. Your level of faith will always be tied to your perception of God. So how are you perceiving God today? I want to encourage you that the best thing that we can do is expect God to be God. Sometimes people, get a little weird with that. I can expect God to show up. I can expect God to answer prayers. I can expect him, because I might not be able to expect what he's going to do, but I can expect God to be a God of peace, to be a God of hope, to be a God of redemption, to be a God who is unchanging. If I believe the Bible, and if I've seen it to be true over and over again, which I have, and I have tried every other way, I'm telling you, in my life, I really have tried so many other ways, and nothing gives me hope. And that's the reason why I turned back to him, because I tried everything else and everything only brought me hopelessness. But God is the God of hope. And out of that, we can find joy and peace, and then we overflow with hope to everyone else around us. So now, Lord, it says in Psalm 39, what do I wait for and expect? My hope and expectations are in you. We can expect him to move and release the outcome. We can expect God to always show up, but release how he's going to do it. God is good and he is for you. And when we mind the gap between the expectations and reality, we can really understand that even in that gap, even in the in-between, that we can still have a vibrant life, that he shows up in our day-to-day, that we can learn from the situations that we're in, that we can learn to trust, and we can become even more vibrant in our relationship with him. This isn't just because you're experiencing a moment that seems dark, doesn't mean that he still is light. He is still in that moment. He can still bring good out of everything. So do you trust this Jesus of hope who can fill you with all joy and peace as you trust in him? My encouragement is that you do, because I promise it will lead to a vibrant life. Thank you for joining me on the Vibrant Life Show. I would love to connect with you and get to know you. My favorite place to hang out is over on Instagram at allie.gentry or over on Facebook. You can also go to my website, alliegentry.com. That's ALIGENTRY.com. Sign up for my newsletter to stay up to date and get links to the show on all platforms after we air, the show's YouTube channel, and really just all the things. I am so honored to get to hang out with you today. My heart is that you remember that each day is an invitation to live the vibrant life.